And recording is in progress. So moving ahead, I want to call to order the Board of Directors regular meeting study session for Thursday, August 17th. Have a roll call, please.
Director Meyerhoffen,
Here.
Director Duff,
Present.
Director Griffith,
Present.
Vice President Sewell,
Here.
President Martin.
Here.
Thank you.
I see that all of our board members are here today, so I'll skip item 3. Moving on to item 4, we'll do that on Monday. And item 5, rules of procedure. Counselor?
Yes, according to the rules of procedure adopted by the Board of Directors, all notice meetings are conducted using Rosenberg's Rules of Order as a procedural guideline. Directors should refrain from responding directly to public comments at meetings of the board. The president of the board presides at all meetings and decides all points of order and procedure during meetings. The president is responsible for the maintenance of order and decorum at all board meetings. No person should be allowed to speak who has not first been recognized by the president. No member of the board should speak more than once upon any one subject until every other member of the board wishing to speak on that subject shall have been given an opportunity to speak. No board member shall interfere with the orderly progress of a board meeting. The board president regulates the amount of time to be dedicated to a particular agenda item.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, public input. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters within the board's jurisdiction. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. State law prohibits the board from discussing or taking action on any item not listed on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address the board?
President Martin, we do not.
Do we have any member present that wishes to? Okay. All right. Moving on to item 7, the Human Resources Report.
President Martin, we will do that on Monday.
Monday, okay. Item 8, Resolution 2023-16, amending Resolution 2023-05, revisions to Mission Springs Water District personnel rules and regulations. It is recommended to adopt Resolution 2023-16, providing for the revisions to Mission Springs Water District personnel rules and regulations. General Manager?
Yes, President Martin, this has been brought to you before and last month, and it was continued to this month. I believe Oriana may have a short report to talk about any changes that have made. I know there's been several discussions that have been had, and we just want to summarize those, and then we'll be available to answer any questions.
Okay.
Is Oriana on? I don't see her.
And we also have V. Sotelo, who's the head of our Labor and Employment Department, that's been working with Oriana present remotely.
Oriana, I think you're muted. Cannot hear you.
Would it be out of order to, I know the next item won't take very long to go over. Could we go to the next item and then come back to that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you.
Item 9, Association of California Water Agencies, Aqua. Region 9 election is recommended to either concur with the Region 9 nominating committee's recommended slate of officers for the 2024-25 term, or concur on the individual candidates for chair, vice chair, and 5 board members, and direct the board president to submit the ballot. Does anybody have any input or suggestions on that item?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like, sorry.
I would like to have us do the obviously chair and vice chair there, but have us do individual. I would like to have us vote for Amber for that position.
Yes. Okay, we can vote up to 5 candidates on there. Is there any other member of that slate that you would wish to nominate?
So I think they always try to do a blend of the western and arid region.
Mhm.
I'd look at their recommended 5 up above, and I'd say we pick one, either Gina or Paul Ortega, which are both arid, to replace with Director Dove. I'm not familiar with Gina. I definitely know Paul over at DWA.
Run that back to replace what?
So
I
they
see,
try
I
to
see
have-
that. You
okay.
said to replace and
I would
then,
replace either
An
Gina or
arid
Paul
person.
okay,
with Director Dove.
okay.
And I'm not familiar with Gina, so that would be my suggestion, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with her.
I'm not personally familiar with any of the people other than meeting Mr. Ortega, but I did notice that there was some new people that hadn't participated before, like the director from San Gorgonio Pass, and I would be willing to nominate them.
Okay, who is that? What's the person's name?
Chandler Latoul,
Then you'll have to get rid of the other 2 ads.
just discussion. That's somebody I would lean to. I don't know them in any more
Okay.
than Imperial or really Paul, so I just was giving my input there.
Well, we're already going with the recommended chair, which is Patrick O'Dowd. Is there a reason why he would have to be a member of the board as well? I mean, is it, in other words, necessary for him to be on the board in order to be chair?
I don't think he's listed on the 5 board members, so above. I think above, he's not listed as being on that.
He's one of the candidates listed on the board members.
Right, but above where they're nominating committee's recommended slate,
Yeah.
here he is not listed as.
No,
on-
but he's
Yes.
the chair. What I'm saying is those are 2 separate distinct positions on the Aqua board. And he doesn't need to be on the board in order to be chair.
Correct.
So, okay, so we could vote for him as chair and not vote for him as a board member.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
Okay. And Amber, your recommendation is Chandler Latouille?
Yeah, only because they haven't been represented from what I can see in Region 9
Okay,
for the last couple of years, and to bring in someone else's opinion in the arid district to me would be valuable.
okay. And what about the other 3 positions? We got you and Chandler and do we want to include Mr. Ortega?
Well, I think if we're gonna replace the 2 arids, that kind of knocks them out and you leave the westerns.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't you guys come up with this, the recommendations on there and we can vote on it on Monday.
Okay.
Okay, so is that okay with everybody?
Mhm.
Okay,
May I ask one question
Sure.
before we think about that?
Sure.
So their slate was to have 3 Western and 2 arid representatives on the board. Is that something we have to follow, or could we say we would recommend 3 arids and 2 Western?
I don't think we have to follow,
We-
but I think that's something they typically do just because there's more population on the west.
On the Western than on the arid? Okay, thank you for the clarification.
yeah, we're not obligated to either vote for any of these, the ones that are recommended up here, or and then we can pick whoever we want down here for the candidates on the list down below, but I'm inclined to go with some of the recommended slate up on top, but with a couple of exceptions. So, but anyway, take a look at it over the weekend on Monday. Let's go ahead and move ahead with making that selection. Ted, did you have anything you wanted to add? No. Okay. And are we ready?
We are. The technical difficulties. have
Human
been-
resources report?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Apologies about that, technical difficulties. But we got it all resolved. I am going to share my screen. Okay. Good afternoon, President Martin and members of the board. As you are aware, we regularly update Mission Springs Water District's personnel rules and regulations. The employee handbook provides guidance and information related to the district personnel policies, procedures, and benefits. Last month, updates to the handbook were presented to the board. At that time, the board provided feedback that now has been incorporated into the changes. Exhibit A on your packet outlines the most recent updates to the district personnel rules and regulations. These updates clarify policy and are in full compliance with the law. I can go through, do you have any questions, or would you like me to go through each one of them? How would you like to proceed?
Any questions? Any comments? Okay. Anything more?
That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's see. Going on to item 8, we're going to do that on Monday.
That was item 8. I think now we
Oh, okay.
to actually approve it and vote on it. Yes, that would be on Monday, but yeah, now I believe we're now down to 10.
Okay. Item 10, resolution 2023-19, appointing interim general manager Brian Macy as secretary of the board of directors. It is recommended to approve resolution 2023-19, appointing Brian Macy secretary of the board of directors, and rescind resolution 2006-27. Brian?
Thank you, President Martin. This is just a normal process. You can guess by the date 2006, that's when Arden was given the position of secretary, and typically our past practice has been the general manager is also the board secretary. I could go through the list of duties, but I think JP did a great job when we were discussing it earlier to go through exactly what those duties are and how much it will actually add to my.
It's very minimal. It's basically signing ordinances and contracts. So it's a formality more than anything else.
Any questions from the board?
Does this mean we have to get you a card for Secretary's Day?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ted, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll vote on that on Monday. Discussion items, item 11, strategic plan review and direction. Ryan.
Thank you, President Martin. I believe we have some discussion topics from Marion to go through the process.
Thank you, General Manager Macy, and good afternoon, members of the board. As a follow-up to our discussions last week, I did contact each of the bidders for a list of references and asked them to provide input and on how their firm approaches will ensure that our plan is followed and regularly updated. Yesterday, we emailed those responses and the reference checks to all of you, and we also left 2 printed copies up at the dais. As requested, I also followed up with CV Strategies to get a polling cost so that you could better make a comparison between the respondents. CV Strat came back with 2 polling options depending on the length and number of the questions asked. Combining the polling would bring CV Strategies bid to about $55,000 to $60,000. As you may recall, the other 2 proposals came in. Woodward and Kern were at $88,000 and Raftellus was $74,575. While I wanted to provide the board with this cost comparison information, I did want to also stress that we did release the solicitation as a request for qualifications. This allows cost to be looked at as a component of the overall package, but it does not need to be the driver of the proposal. The approach will allow us for the scope and the fees to be negotiated as part of the contracting process. Giving the additional information, should you feel comfortable today selecting a vendor and providing staff with a budget, we can then go back to the vendor to work on an agreement. With that, I will turn it back to President Martin.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Did I ever?
I really appreciated the information we received yesterday. It really was informative, helped me reading between the lines on their answers and working with the different groups. And it didn't make it any easier, obviously, to try and make a decision here. They're all very qualified. I did have one question. When you're saying we can come back with instruction for cost, are we able to say we want to go with one person in particular, but we don't want this or this?
That is exactly.
Okay, thank you. That's
Right.
my only question right now.
Robert?
I have no questions. Most of my comments will probably come Monday. I did study this, and as Director Duff says, it doesn't make it any easier. It's kind of nice to get competent answers. And so I have some initial thoughts on what I'd like to do. I'll probably talk about them on Monday as we kind of gear, so everyone has a little more time to look at this. But I really appreciate this. It really, in the past, we've had stuff come with us and we have nothing like this. It's just this little paper in our binder and that's it. And we have to go on that. So having some substance to actually make an educated and informed decision really, really helps. So I just want to say thank you so much, as did Director Duff. It really made a difference. But again, not an easy choice. But I know which way I'm leaning, but I'll wait till Monday and get everybody's feedback. So
Good.
Yes. I'll have some more comments come Monday, but right now I'm looking at the fact that 2017, was it, when last one was done?
2016, I believe.
16,
17.
And nothing ever came of it, really. Some of the things Brian has worked on there, but as far as the board and the public, nothing really came of it. And when I looked at it, I didn't see any other additional comments on how the board and the staff was going to accomplish those goals. So what is the value really to the district by getting this done if it gets forgotten? So I need to be reassured that it won't be forgotten and that we're going to have some kind of time frame of something, some kind of game plan for what we're looking at so that we can move forward with it. So that's all I have for right now.
Okay. Ivan?
And I appreciate the additional information. I don't know if it's something we want to discuss more today as far as which way we're leaning and see if we're, are we all kind of scattered or headed in one direction? I don't mind sharing that. I think my first pick would be Woodward, followed by CV Strategies, and then Raptelis. I don't know if having a discussion now would help us as far as looking at stuff over the weekend, or if we're wanting to just try and do all that on Monday.
Well, hopefully we get some input from the comments that we're moving ahead with now. One of the comments that I have is we recently were honored for public outreach, both at I believe it was the county level and the state, the county level and the state, and no other water district in the Coachella Valley was so honored, and no other in the state. We got the top award for our public outreach. And while it's very clear to me that you deserve the lion's share of credit for making that happen, you were assisted by CV Strategies, and but I've also been informed that we can still continue to use them even if they're not selected as the putting together the strategic plan. So we can still utilize them. So that necessarily isn't going to be an issue for me any longer, as long as we can continue that. I don't want to break up the team because it was working really, really good. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think I can elaborate a little more. I'm actually in agreement with with Vice President Sewell as far as how he's rated them. The concern or the thing I was hoping for was to maybe sit down and see if we could get closer to the 70,000 range with them instead of the 88. And I don't know what we would have to give up to do that, because I'm a little uncomfortable with such a high amount. But I, like you, was leaning toward them. And funny, given the president's comments, it was actually because of that, because we currently have working contracts with CV Strategies and now with Rough Tellus for our financial planning. I felt that engaging someone completely separate to do our strategic plan, to focus only on that, to help us stay focused on that versus having to wear multiple hats, like work on our financial and work on the CV Strategies job at the same time. I know they have multiple employees that handle different aspects, but that was why I was leaning more toward the Woodward and I always mess up Kieran. The other concern I had was the Rough Tellus legal striking of the contract. That didn't sit well with me. So that's just my 2 cents on it, if we wanted to elaborate more.
And they're not local. So that's another issue. CV Strategies have Palm Desert, aren't they? Sure.
Yes, excuse me, CV Strategies does have offices in Palm Desert. Woodward and Kern is not local anymore, but they are here quite frequently. So we do see Katie here on the ground quite often.
I have something more now that I've heard everybody. Excuse me. I was kind of going with CV Strategies because they are local. And hearing what I just heard, they have, when they go to do the strategic plan, they already have knowledge of what is going on within the district. They seem to have a good working relationship with Miss Champion there. And their $35,000 price I like. And naturally we can go up from there, and it's easier, like I said last meeting, to go up than it is to take $80,000 and start knocking it off. It's kind of scares you in the business when you get an $80,000 contract and then the district wants to knock you down. So that's kind of shaky to me, but so I'm going with CV Strategies. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
All right. Anything further?
Well, I mean, now you guys are all getting deep into it. I would deep into it, okay? So yeah, I would concur with Director Duff and Sewell in terms of my leaning. And so there's certain things that I look at when you bring this stuff forward. I think CV Strategies does a great job at communication. I think that's probably their real strength. My personal feeling is that for this organization, we need some organization that has real good, strong technical knowledge. And I'm not saying they don't, but when I look at what the others are bringing to the table, I would say they were a little more lacking in that than what the other two organizations were. If we really want to put things in the direction they need to go, we need some really good team behind us. The issue I have with Rough Tellus, okay, so you look at this like a first date, you know, you go on a first date, everybody's on their best behavior. If you're smart, you tell them all your flaws, what your expectations are, and if they don't like it, they can hit the road. So you have an organization comes in here with a proposal and red lines on part of the contract that's sent out there. It's nice they're upfront about that as opposed to after the fact, because we've got burned on that. However, I think what struck me was two questions were asked. One, is this a deal breaker? And the answer was no. Second was, what was the intent of this? And it was, well, I don't know, the lawyers did it. And so I don't know that that person can speak to whether or not that's a deal breaker because the lawyers did it. So there's a disconnect from my perspective in that I'm not real comfortable with that, in that you have one person who's the figurehead saying one thing, but not knowing the full basis of everything. And so when I look at that, I really kind of leaned towards Woodward, and the price is a little high. I'm not going to say that I'm real happy with the price. I would like to see it come down, but You know, as everybody knows, I don't buy my clothes at Walmart, okay? Sometimes you gotta pay a little more for some good stuff. So that's just kind of where I'm leaning.
Okay. I concur with everything that's been said, and interestingly enough, the three candidates that were interviewed all were excellent. By the way, that all those companies were excellent. And I wouldn't want anybody to think that any of this is critical of them, and it's really a close call from my perspective. And I haven't decided between the two that I'm considering yet, but I'm close. So by Monday, I'll have a selection. Anything you want to add? Ryan?
No, just to reiterating what Marion said when she started, we will be asking for the consultant, what the board would like to see as the lead consultant. And then after that, staff will then probably ask, since there is a wide range of cost and a wide range of scope, some easy questions that we would ask. How many meetings are important to the board to have? And then how many meetings do you think the staff would need? For example, I've been talking about it with Marion, and we were thinking that you would have one big meeting, a public workshop there where you have the public component, because we've talked about, do we do a survey? Do we not do a survey? If we don't do a survey and do a public workshop, then that allows the public to be at that particular meeting, add input, and then we would still be able to do everything that we needed to do from a strategic SWOT analysis and pull everything out of the board that you want to be said and what your priorities are. Then we would be able to meet with staff. Then it would come back to the board and say, okay, we have a couple of questions here. Can you clarify that? Then they would then bring back for a final presentation, the final document. So when we were talking about amongst ourselves, we were thinking maybe 3 meetings with the board and 2 meetings with staff, and one of them would be public. However, as we've talked about, the scope does include a customer survey component in some of them, but not all. If that's something the board wants or wants to remove, we've already gone through a couple of options in our head of whichever way we're going to have public input. We're not going to be operating in a vacuum. So from that perspective, we would ask for direction on Monday, not only the consultant, but also give us your ideas on number of meetings with or without the customer survey. That way we can then negotiate the contract and bring it back to you. Or if price is really the thing, and we've already made the selection of the consultant, give us that price and we'll say, hey, how do you minimize your scope or increase your scope to get to that specific dollar amount? So we can go whatever direction the board gives us. I just want to make clear that those are going to be the things that we're going to be asking for
We're not going to
clarification.
make a selection on Monday. Is that correct?
We would like to have a selection on Monday.
Probably I hate to nitpick. This probably shouldn't have been under a discussion item then, but.
Well, so we want to get the board direction, and that would be the selection, and then we'll negotiate contract. If it's over 50,000 then or 75,000, it will come back to you for approval. So there's still yet another mechanism there. If it's under 50,000, I will have the authority to go ahead and sign that contract. So from that perspective, that's where the negotiation happens. The selection does not necessarily lock you into a consultant at this time.
Okay, all right.
I just want to ask you something. So if you've we've read through these, and what some of the feedback is have you had any staff meetings regarding this yet? And in other words, pulling them together, letting them know what we're going to be doing so that they can start now preparing for their feedback?
So at the management level, yes, we have an all hands meeting for Tuesday to do exactly that and get staff start to get their feedback, letting them know what is the strategic plan. We've talked about doing one 7 years ago. We've had a lot of staff change since in 7 years, as any organization would. So yes, we are going to start teeing them up to let them know what our expectations are about that and many other things moving forward.
Okay, because in some of these, that was their key thing was the staff wasn't prepared enough. And I think in order to keep the cost as well as the length of this down, the more prepared we are, even ourselves, in terms of looking at what we want, looking at the capital improvement projects list, all this stuff, so that when we meet with them, we're not wasting time. So that's my recommendation.
If it's possible and we cannot meet as staff and board at the same time, knowing that right now I heard three board members pull out somebody that's not local, we would then make the decision, can we do that over a Zoom call? And that would allow us even more flexibility to minimize costs and things like that. So I guess from that perspective, we can deal with that on our own. We actually meet with Katie on a routine basis through Zoom in their own process, but I think the board activity should be face-to-face. So regardless of who you select, those board meetings, I would request that they actually be on-prem. So from that perspective, just other things to think about as you're going through your thought process and selection and scope. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really stuck out to me about Woodward and Rapatellis was their involvement of employees, and I definitely want to see that. But one thing I'd be willing to possibly get rid of if we were to choose Woodward would be the survey. And I guess my question is just, do you or Marion, do you guys have experience in prior times doing the surveys, and how beneficial do you think they were? And do you have ideas like a public meeting or utilizing what we know from our customer service and your involvement online? Are there ways for us to avoid that $15,000 to $20,000 survey?
We can definitely do some type of surveying digitally online, and then also, do like the public meetings and get input. I have done surveys where we've done both digital, phone, and even in-person focus groups. I don't think we really need that much input. I don't know that we're at the focus group level, but I definitely think we could do something digitally, an online survey where we do something, we put everybody who enters and gives information, we put their name in a hat and we draw for, free case of water or something like that. And then we would just go out and advertise and get people's participation levels up. The only problem with that is the people who typically respond are the people who are either very happy with you or very unhappy with you. So that's where sometimes the phone surveys and the focus groups can actually get a little bit broader result, but I still think we can get pretty good results to help us frame this, at least just by doing the digital surveys.
And do you think there's a way, I mean, we're almost at 50% now with our customer portal. Is there a way to use that as a way to get some information possibly?
Absolutely. What we can also use that to push out the messages about the surveys. We probably use an engine like SurveyMonkey, which actually aggregates and keeps all of your data in one place. But we would use something like the portal to push out messaging to customers to get their participation.
But that would all be in-house. I mean, it'd be staff time, but
We could do all of that in-house. Yep. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
And we could also do it outside of the strategic plan scope and fee. We could put in there that we want to do a customer survey, maybe as a benchmark in the next 6 months, and then follow up with another one in 18 months to see the changes that we've made in going through the strategic plan, some of the key points. I know we're working very heavily right now with customer service, and not just customer service, but the entire district, because it's all of our responsibility to do customer service and be more friendly or try to help if we can in any possible way. So we're making a concentrated effort on that. And we personally want to benchmark that. So even when we're talking at the staff level, we're looking at doing surveys, and at least 2 of them, so we can gauge that. So if it's not part of the strategic plan and incorporated in some of the key points and the priorities, if you will, we're going to be doing that for other purposes. So if it's not part of this, that's okay. We can do it outside of that, or like I said, we can include it and then the priorities and help drive those as well. So either way.
Jed?
2 things. I spoke with our interim general manager, Macy, here in the 19 pages. I told him there was no hurry, but just so the board knows, I've requested that he goes through those from our last strategic plan. It was 19 pages, and mark off what was accomplished and what he thinks needs to be accomplished. So that will be coming up, and I think that'll be important for all of us to look at to go from there. I have a suggestion. Most all the mobile home parks have a meeting place. Maybe if you went out and had meetings with those people, some of them, some of the parks aren't on our system for water, but nevertheless, you can go out there and ask them what they've heard, what they feel, meet one-on-one with them. Maybe a good way to get some input that way. Thank you. That's it.
Anything else?
Just really briefly about the survey. For me, just so that everyone knows where my head is at in regards to the survey, I'm more interested in a very focused, here's where the board's discussion is as far as priorities. Here's 1 through 6 or what have you, and get the community feedback as to whether they agree with those priorities. And that's more where I'm at, to send out a survey as part of the strategic plan that would be generalized. I don't see as being helpful than to be very specific in what we would be surveying, so to speak. So that's one thing that I do have a concern with, because I don't want to muddy our focus on the big picture with little pictures that will undoubtedly come to the light, which we still want to address. But for our strategic plan purposes, I want to make sure that however we go about it, it keeps us focused and doesn't, like I said, muddy the water. Anyway, that's.
And we can set it up that way so that, we're listing a priority or we're listing several priorities, and then we ask the ratepayer, rate these into your list of priorities, and are you willing to spend money on these priorities? There's ways to set up those questions to really kind of tease that information out. It just is a little bit more work, and it's less than just customer service. It's more than customer service benchmarking.
Right. And thank you to all the staff for all of your work on this. I have been asking for this since like my 2nd month after being sworn in. And I just can't tell you how happy I am to see us all moving forward with this. I think it's so important. And in all the education we received, we're told this is the most important way for us to communicate with our general manager and our staff what we want and what we need and what we see as being the priority. And so I'm so grateful that you guys have put in all this hard work. Thank you.
And just to follow up what she said on there, I think it's really important that we get feedback from staff on the selection process, because for the most part, it's going to be you all working with them. We're going to be working with them too, but not to the extent that staff is. So I really want to get the input of which companies you're leaning toward. One of them, in my view, I have eliminated, but they're still the 2 top contenders, and I'm open to either one of them. So
I just want to add, today it's a momentous occasion. Director Duff said she's happy.
okay.
And I am. Thank you.
Anything further? Anything? Okay, moving on to the item 12, Nancy Wright Regional Water Reclamation Facility update.
Thank you, President Martin. Steve Ledbetter from TKU will be providing a presentation.
Okay.
Steve, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, General Manager Macy, and President Martin, members of the board. I'll be sharing my screen for our presentation today. Okay, so we'll get right into it. We're going to start in the headworks area and kind of work our way through the plant like we typically do. A lot of work's been done on the headworks area. This is the area where the white wastewater first enters the treatment plant. On the right-hand side of your screen, these are the cutthroat flumes that will measure flows coming in. There's slide gates that you can see that will help control flows, how they go through the plant. And this on the left-hand side of the screen, you can kind of get an idea on how deep these channels actually are with the worker down in there cleaning them out. In addition, from there, the untreated wastewater goes through the grit removal chamber. These are the 2 big squares on the left-hand side that will take out any of the grit, so it doesn't foul up any of the additional portions of the plant or accumulate in the SBR tanks, which is burdensome to operations and maintenance of the plant. From there, it goes into the SBR channels, and the contractor JF Shea has continued progress on kind of outfitting the channels with the different equipment. You can see here a bunch of the hand railing around all of the SBR channel catwalks is being installed. The SBR equipment is continuing to go in, all the piping and valves being placed on the screen in front of you. That's all the air piping that will be used to feed the microbes and help them do their job. In addition, these are kind of the influent pipes and valves that will help control the flow into the SBR basins, as well as some of the valves and piping that will remove scum from the plant, as well as remove any sludge from the bottom of the basins as it will accumulate. In addition, the boosters, there's 2 boosters that will provide the 3W water. That's for operations and maintenance on site only. That has gone in, and you can see the pump pedestals are being formed up and being ready to be poured for concrete. In addition, the on-site water system continued to progress. This is an 8-inch line that will feed the entire plant that's connected to Mission Springs' existing 24-inch transmission main out in Little Morongo Road. So you can see we're doing everything from 8-inch piping to 2-inch water service that will ultimately provide water service to the operations building. For the on-site sewer system, on the left-hand side, that's the big oil water separator to make sure that no oil gets into the treatment plant. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, that's a metering manhole, and that will give the district an opportunity to track any of the wastewater that is used or generated on-site from what comes from off-site. That's critical in determining, in keeping track of everything coming from the system versus what is generated or recycled on-site. In addition, the Edison interconnection facilities continue to progress. The vaults for the main distribution panels were set last month and then poured in July, and the actual meter panels were set last month. Matter of fact, Edison was out there today to give final inspection and buy off on the panel and vaults you see in front of you today. The operations building, we finally got a break in the weather out there, the wind. So the contractor was able to finish all the exterior cladding around the treatment plant, around the operations building. So you can see all the vestibules on the west side of the building, as well as all the exterior panels are all complete. It's looking like a much more finished site once you go out there today. Moving through the different rooms or portions of the building, the blower room, the blowers were received and placed, as well as the piping that will ultimately connect and send air over to the SBR tanks. In the electrical room, this is the main electrical panels on the right-hand side that control everything within the plant. And on the left-hand side, that is the actual control panel from Alpha Laval that will control the SBR tanks specifically. Into the operations control center, you can see a lot of that area has been outfitted, a lot of the HVAC lines, a lot of the plumbing and drainage facilities, and the only thing left is the fire suppression system that would be going in this month. Onto the chemical room. The chemical room's mostly completed. There will be some piping that's done, but these are the peristaltic pumps that will help deliver chemicals to the treatment plant as part of the treatment process. But you can kind of see all the walls have been painted, the floorings have been epoxy coated. So everything's moving along and really getting that polished look in each of the rooms. The maintenance workshop, again, you can kind of see up on the top side, all the insulation and painting and HVAC systems done. The lights have been hung. So it's good to see that the kind of a finished product coming together. In the dewatering room, the hydropneumatic tank, again, that 3W pumps that we talked about, it will provide water to this hydropneumatic system, which will provide adequate water pressure for on-site maintenance, as well as our dewatering equipment, the belt filter press, the loadout conveyor has all been installed and completed. On the conveyance line, the contractor continued working up Little Morongo. They're nearly up to 18th Avenue along Little Morongo. And I thought this was a good picture on the left-hand side. That's, about 10 or 12 feet tall or 10 feet tall. They're shields that they use to protect the workers when they're setting the pipe down in the trench. And you can kind of get a feeling for the size. That's a 6 foot tall chain link fence on the side of it there. In addition, continuing work just showing you kind of how the manholes get built. Once the base is poured, they stack the manhole rings up, and ultimately the cone, which will have a manhole set on top of it for access for maintenance in the future. Regarding the funding updates, the phase 1, which is the treatment plant, as you recall, we got a reimbursement request submitted back in June. We've been working with state board staff, answering any questions, and they have confirmed that our invoice has been approved for processing as of July 21st. So that meant it went to the accounting department for processing. I haven't had a chance to check with our director of finance if we've received that payment yet, but it is expected to come through this month. Because again, everything cleared back on July 21st, which was good news. In addition, we're working on our second reimbursement request that will capture basically all Q2 of this year costs, as well as previous soft costs that were not captured in reimbursement request or invoice number 1. The phase 2 conveyance line, we submitted our final budget approval package back on May 25th. And similar to what happened with the treatment plant, it takes several months before that gets approved and we can start invoicing for that portion of work. But we continue to follow up with the state every other week regarding the status of that and the status of the reimbursement requests. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions from the board? Ted?
Yes, sir, I have two, but you already answered one out in the parking lot for me the other day, but so the rest of the board members know. The timeline before you're able to, the control panels come in and you're able to get that up was the end of August?
Yeah, Director Meyerhoffen, that's a great question. So one of the main pieces of equipment that is part of the electrical system is the motor control centers. It controls any of the pumps on site. That has been a long lead item. Everything was done and approved back in June of 2022, but the shipment and procurement of those has been delayed. We're expected to receive those at the end of September. So then the contractor can install them in October and we can begin our startup and commissioning process in late November, early December. So that's what our schedule looks like now. That's been an ongoing issue, and the factories, you know, in our discussions with the contractor, they're apprehensive to give you a shipment date until they get within a month or two. And we finally got that date in the last week. So we know when we're actually expecting that equipment. That said, the contractor is moving through each component of the plant and doing final items and final punch list items, working towards that so that we can get substantial completion on everything else but that motor control center piece of equipment, which again will be done sometime in October.
Okay, I have two more questions.
Sure.
This might sound a little off the wall there, but there's a reason for me asking. All this equipment that's electrically controlled, do you know how much power it's going to use at maximum capacity, correct? That's how you know what wire to run in, panels.
I have that number somewhere, but it's been some time before I've looked at the life cycle costs. So Director Meyerhoffen, I don't have that, but I can get it for you.
No, it's fine. I just want the board here for later on. There's a reason for it. They'll find out. So your answer is fine. Do you know how much power we're going to be using in the future there at maximum capacity? Okay. Now you showed me a picture of the landscaping there in the beginning. There was a quick photo in the beginning of your presentation. Is that what it's going to look like?
Yes. So, sorry, I'll bring that back up real quick. Just to, so all that's proposed is some desert landscaping at just the northerly entrance. That's kind of the, that's the main entrance or the quote unquote signature entrance to the plant. It's just going to be some small desert landscaping, drought tolerant, desert friendly landscaping. And it will just be at this kind of entrance right here.
Is that a pine tree I'm looking at?
The rendering's not accurate. It does appear to be a pine tree, but the rendering's not accurate for what's actually being proposed. This rendering was done, I think, sometime back in 2019. So that's not.
So this isn't my problem here with this is I would rather see one mesquite tree and maybe one Palo Verde tree, so you have some kind of shade. If you have shade, the plants underneath it, your ground cover are going to use less water. And we have a certified arborist who's on our landscape contractor. He should be able to keep the canopy there on those trees where they should be. All those rocks and everything, it just heats it up. So we're creating an actual heat island. Just I've never been able to get any shade out of a palm tree. I don't care if you stand at attention next to it, it's still difficult. So I would like to see that changed a little bit to be more friendly to what we're doing. And as far as all that rock and decomposed granite, I would rather see you put in wood chips from a local recycler so it holds the water when it rains and cools it off, and it amends the soil as we go along. So those are my ideas there on the landscaping. Thank you.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Ivan?
Yeah, just, I heard you mentioning early December. Is that when we're looking now for hopefully turning the plan on, getting online?
Yeah, that's when we'll do the startup procedures, which starts with a clean water test. And they make sure, functionality of all the equipment's good before we actually start sending flows from the Dos Palmas lift station over to the plant to start the actual treatment process. It's about a 2-week process that really gets that startup clean water testing and function system testing. And then that will be sometime in December.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Amber?
No question.
Robert?
Yeah, if possible, would you be able to check on that reimbursement check and let, if you're not here on Monday, let either Brian or Marion know about that? Because I know we're all eager to get that in the bank.
I will do that, Director Griffith. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the public? Well, none here in the boardroom. Any further from staff?
No, other than even if we do not have an updated timeline of that check on Monday, when we do receive it, we will let everyone know because we know we've all been patiently waiting for it, especially Arturo.
Okay. Moving on to item 13, Critical Services Center and Administration Building Update. I assume Steve Ledbetter is continuing?
Actually, no.
Oh,
We're going to have our architect provide an update on this. As we've talked about in previous meetings, I'm going to be stepping away from being sort of the lead in this project, and Alvin has agreed to take on that responsibility. So Alvin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, General Manager Macy. Thank you for having me, President Martin, and members of the board and district staff. So let me share the screen, get to the presentation. I want to go to full screen, but it can work from here. So, all right. So as General Manager Macy mentioned, he's asked me to be the face of the project as we move forward on this. So I will be doing my best to provide updates, answer any questions, and develop any additional information that the board or the district staff may need. We've been doing this throughout the entirety of the process and working very closely with Brian, but I think now with his additional duties and responsibilities that, this may be a little bit more than he would like to handle, so he can focus on other things as well. So as we move forward now, I know there's already been discussions on the challenges to the existing 2 Bunch Palm site, and we are looking at exploring alternate locations. When we first started working on this project, we discussed various other locations as well and ended up landing on the 2 Bunch Palm sites. And now we're trying to take another step back and maybe reevaluate the validity and or if another site may be more appropriate or easier to develop as we move forward. So one of the things we're looking at the alternate site at Park Lane is if there's any other environmental issues on that site similar to and or of the same magnitude that are at 2 Bunch Palm sites. So as of now, there's nothing that we are aware of or have discovered. So that's a plus to the Park Lane site. Another item that Brian has mentioned to me is talking more about making the facility a green facility. These were items that were brought up very early on the process as well. And one of the biggest items related to that would be the upfront cost. And in order to better understand how that upfront cost could affect the operations of the building in the far future, we would end up needing to look at a life cycle analysis, or probably more appropriately, life cycle cost analysis. So that is something that we haven't done thus far. But I did want to speak to some of the sustainability items and or measures that we've already implemented in the current design. especially in regards to stormwater pollution prevention. So we have a lot of best management practices. If we do move the facility to a different location, we'll have to reevaluate those again, but we would still follow best management practices as best we can. We also have light pollution items that we are looking at in terms of light selection and how luminaires are pointed to make sure that we adhere to dark skies and or other requirements within the code. There's also shading that we're making sure that's being provided in the parking lot. I believe Director Mayoffin mentioned, heat island. That is always a concern. So there are code requirements in terms of providing adequate shade or some shade, at least in the parking lot, to help reduce those effects of heat island. We also have various water and or energy mitigation measures that are provided within the building as well. So those are some of the sustainability items that are, as I mentioned earlier, currently already implemented in the design. And if we want to go further than that, well, we are happy to explore that. And like I mentioned, probably a life cycle cost analysis would be one of the first items that we want to try to tackle to help everyone understand how that those types of items or implementations would affect the cost of the project and or the operation of the project in the future. Next, so I believe General Manager Macy has already shown some of our options to the board, and there's been some discussion. So I apologize if I'm going to repeat some of the items, but I did want to very quickly go through our logic and or some of our reasonings behind kind of the different explorations as we look further into some options for the Park Lane site. So some of the key elements will be taking over from the two Bunch Palm sites or administration building, operations building, the demonstration garden, and various other public and or staff usage areas. So we first began exploring the conditions that would affect the site itself, wherever that was located. So at the two Bunch Palm site, we explored prevailing winds. We did a solar study, and we're also looking at various views and or how it can connect to the local landscape. So at the new site, because we're not that far from the other site, it's roughly the same general items that we addressed there. So I think the main items that are different would be the access. So Park Lane is actually going to be on the north side of the site versus two Bunch Palms was actually on the south side of the site. So what that would do in terms of it would affect the orientation of the building. So you'll see in another options that we're actually rotating at about 180 degrees in order to keep the front facing the main access street. The other item of note is for the prevailing winds at the two Bunch Palm site, we actually had an adjacent building. We also located the operations building in such a manner that it helped break up and or lessen the effects of those prevailing winds. At the new site, directly to the west would be the public parking lot for the Mission Springs Park. So we're not quite as protected on the site as much as we had at the two Bunch Palm site, but as we look further into this, we can try to find other measures that would help reduce those. So those are probably the two biggest items. So as I move into the options, option number one is, as best we can, a direct translation from the two Bunch Palm sites to the Park Lane site, with the major differences, like I mentioned, that we ended up rotating the administration building 180 degrees, and the other item is the operations building is now located, on the eastern side more so than the western side. So as I mentioned, we're not going to be able to use that building as much to break the prevailing wind. And one of the logics behind having this orientation is there's better access from the existing public parking onto the site versus if we ended up putting the operations building here, it would block that access. So that was one reason behind that. And again, this is as best a direct translation as we can from the existing site to new site. One of the challenges that we're seeing with this is if we do have the public parking lot used as the main entry point for the public, then you're going to be entering the site kind of on the side of a building, which is an optimum for us. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to figure out where the main entry is. So as we looked at other explorations on the site, on top of rotating the building, in this one, we're actually mirroring it a little bit and pushing it further back from Park Lane to give a little bit of room up in the front. So what this does is it allows a little bit easier view to the front of the building and or where your main entrances would be. We also are looking at maybe using, in this case, the demonstration garden as a buffer space, so a transition space. So as you go from the parking lot and as you traverse toward the administration building, again, you have this nice transition space that you're walking through, and you also have good vision of how you're going to be entering the new building. The next option is very similar, except in this one, we're looking at maybe creating an entry plaza. So instead of having the demonstration garden up front, in this case, the demonstration garden is going to be a little bit more protected in the back. You'll have more ability to secure it and or control access to it. But in the front, again, same thing. We did want there to be a little bit of room as you enter the building. So in this case, it would probably be areas that have seating, a little bit of landscaping, but probably not as intensive as what we would do with a demonstration garden. For this option, I know one of the concerns talking to Brian was the as we mirrored the building, the operations department and the operations building are starting to get a little further away. So it may just increasing that walking distance and making it a little bit more difficult to work on an everyday basis. So in this case, we're trying to find a way to maybe reduce that amount of walk. And with that, in this option, we're also looking at, there's the possibility of reducing the amount of site that we have to develop. So this could help a little bit with costs. Not to say that you couldn't develop more in the future. Our other options when we're at the Two Bunch Palm site is we wanted to make sure that there was always room for growth and the ability to expand as necessary or as needed, depending on how the district operations are going. And our last option kind of circles back to the first option, and what we were, as we explore more and more in the design, we are trying to incorporate other elements. So we did like how the building was rotated in some of the other options and pushed back from the street. In this case, we're not mirroring the building, and the boardroom now is closer to that public parking lot in this one. So, and but again, we still have that same ability of being able to see where the front door is the moment that visitors come driving down Park Lane, park in the public parking lot, or go into the visitor lot of the administration building. Again, it's very easy to tell where you're going to go and how you're going to enter the building. And from there, into the next steps. So again, as I mentioned, exploring and understanding the pros and cons of the existing Two Bunch Palm site that we have our design at, or potentially exploring using the Park Lane site. So having that selection will be important in terms of how we're going to move forward. And then we have a list of kind of other items that we'll end up having to do if the corporate yard site is selected. We would end up more or less have to start over in terms of a lot of the site development. The hope is that we would reuse the building itself as much as we can. There will be some oddities to it just because it was purpose built for the Two Bunch Palm site, but in order to save time, we would try to use that as much as we can. And we already know that the district staff has reviewed the building design and the building floor plan layout, and from what I understand, are very happy with how everything's working out. So we don't want to disrupt that if we don't have to, but obviously moving it to a different site does have some potential ramifications for that. So, and with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Amber?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very nice to meet you. The last couple slides that you shared, or the last few comments, that was kind of the tough ones, right? Talking about the cost change. Could you potentially give the board a little more idea as to if the Park Lane site is chosen, what costs associated with those necessary changes? And I know it can't be exact, but kind of an estimation.
It's a very good question, Mr. Duff. So there's probably a little too much that I would have to parse through in order to answer that question, unfortunately. So as I mentioned, probably the biggest cost would be landscape redesign and civil redesign. We don't quite have enough information yet on the corporate yard in terms of topographic survey, utilities, and some of those infrastructure pieces. So I'm working to gather that as much as I can, but unfortunately, without that information, it's kind of difficult for me to do that. I can say that the hope is that in terms of not delaying the project as much as possible, we would try to take within 2 to 3 months to redevelop that one piece, and it would just be the site work. That's the hope. But unfortunately, I have to dance around that one a little bit for now. So, but by the next meeting, once other selections are made, I can definitely come up with a more exact answer.
Okay. And when you say the site plan or the site specific plan changes, would you say that's generally 50% of the work in the entirety of the whole project that you've just gone through? Is that 30%?
Let's see. I know the acreage of the sites are different. So for instance, I believe Two Bunch Palms site was about 20 acres total. We were only developing about half of that. The Park Lane site is, I believe, at least the area that we've designated so far is maybe between 5 and 6 acres. So, I mean, using that logic, then it would be half the area that we'd have to develop. So I won't say that's exactly half the cost, but yes, it will be less in terms of the site development costs, because there's going to be less acreage that we would end up having to develop.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if you would have the answer to this question or not, or it might just be more of something we need to think about. One of the concerns that had been brought to me by our previous general manager regarding the Park Lane site has been the traffic and the traffic signal. And I don't know, or lack thereof, there on Palm and Park Lane. And I know that there is city plans for that to happen, but can we get some more information from the city regarding the timeline that they have for that signal? And maybe by Monday, could you guys as staff members give us more information as to how many accidents in a year's time we're really talking about taking place with our staff?
Accidents with our staff?
Yeah, my
at that
understanding
intersection?
is, my understanding was that we had several accidents. At least that's what I was told. So I'm
No,
just trying to
we've
understand.
never had, to my knowledge, we've never had one. We've had one accident.
Okay. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That alleviates some of the stress that I was having in that decision. Thank you so much.
Let me just add to that. We have met with the city about when that light would be required. It has been conditioned several different times, and I believe they have the design completed, and they're just waiting to have the traffic study. There's a specific number of trips that have to go through that intersection or accidents or something like that before they actually have to build that. And they haven't met those thresholds yet. If we were to build at this location, we would actually see a reduction in total trips, at least that we participate in, because the natural gas facility would have to go somewhere else. So we would actually see a reduction. So we wouldn't be helping that light happen. But knowing that we do have access to Verbena and going up and going to that light, our staff would then start migrating that way even more than they already do. Second of all, there is an RFP out right now for the housing project across the street from the park. They will also, that alone will probably trigger that necessity for that light, or it could be the development behind the grocery outlet as well. So there's a lot of different triggers not related to us. And because we'd be reducing traffic down that Park Lane, we would not be part of that trigger. So from that perspective, the light will more than likely be there. as we start to get closer to opening this building if we did select that location. And the city's already prepared to go down that path without our participation in the cost.
Okay, just a follow-up question on that. Preliminary plans were for the major access to the facility from the public and everything would be Park Lane to the east, all the way down to the next intersection, voiding that intersection of Park and the and Palm Drive. What's become of that?
Park Lane,
Extending over to the next street that we have access to and completely going the opposite direction, from staying completely away from Park and Palm and going down to the other one. I thought there was plans to go that route.
There have been discussions to try to create different ways to get people off of Palm sooner. And that using Park Lane is one of the first east-west connectors to get to Verbena. The city's looking at several different things. One, continuing Verbena south, there is right-of-way access to take it all the way down to, is it Campanero? Campanero. So that's one option. The other one is taking Park and continuing it all the way to Verbena. There's a variety of different things the city has looked at. However, that housing development that's going to go across the street, they may be conditioned to put a storm sewer to go all the way down Park and then because that's where the outlet of that storm sewer would be, versus taking it through our site or through the park and taking it south. There's just not enough capacity in that area. So without having to do major improvements to the park or to our site, that housing development would have to put a storm sewer to go down Park. When they do something like that, that would also trigger some type of repair or remediation or improvements to Park Lane. So again, there are several different things going on right now that would enhance the traffic patterns around that facility. Would it completely eliminate us coming out of this site and turning left and going down Palm to take a right, to then go to Two Bunch and take a left and go down to Little Morongo? Probably not. But as far as that left-hand turn, and that's the one that's probably the most problematic for our staff, as they do now, they'd go up to Two Bunch and come down and go south.
I'm just concerned about having an option. I'm not saying we could close
I'm
off
sorry.
Park Lane to Palm. They could still access that, but to have an option at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Palm Drive is a parking lot from at least from Dillon all the way into town. And the idea of getting trucks and personnel in and out of that facility utilizing that street, I think is problematic. And I was hoping that we could access it to the east rather than.
So I can tell you from experience, no matter what time of day it is, I take Verbena and Ocotillo all the way down. I take Ocotillo down to Two Bunch, and then I go left, and then I go down Verbena. I do not get on Palm unless I have to. So from that perspective, and Danny's the one that taught me that. So from that perspective, staff knows how to get around without using Palm as it is today.
Yeah.
And we will continue to have that as an option moving forward.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was I don't want us to rely on the parking lot at Mission Springs Park for parking for the public or anybody else, because they have sometimes events that they fill up that parking lot up. And I would hate to have employees or people that have water district business come there and not have a place to park. So hopefully we have parking. I saw that there was several of the plans did have parking lot. I just was wondering if that was large enough for the business that we would be conducting there.
I know I said I wasn't going to take the lead, and here I am answering all these questions, and I apologize. But that particular point, Alvin and I have worked to make sure that there is separate specific visitor parking on all 5 of these options. And for that reason, one of the things that we were also talking about internally is if we did one of the things we talked about early on in this project was using that public parking specifically for all public parking, and we would be behind a fence or something like that. The reason we migrated away from that, especially when you start looking at some of these different ideas that they're putting out today, is that we'd ask a lot of people to walk, even at the closest point. The one is shown in front of us, for example. We would have to walk from the parking all the way across the boardroom, across half the property to get to the customer service area. That's not going to work for a lot of different reasons. Therefore, every single one has our own specific parking. If we have an event that we do not, and typically our public parking right now is only 4 or 5 people up here. The most people we've had here since I've been here. Now, granted, we haven't had a public hearing about any rate discussions or anything like that. But when we were doing the Riverside County assistance programs, we had a full parking lot both here and everywhere else. Even that was about 20 folks. We have sufficient visitor parking, if you see just from comparison perspective, to handle everything that we would normally see here. If for one reason we had 200 people show up, we would then put a sign up that would say overflow parking into the park. And that would be a specific purpose and only would happen maybe once every 5 to 10 years at most. So we do have visitor parking out front of the building specific for our purposes in every one of these designs.
Howard?
I like that you snuck extra options in there.
Those last two were,
Kind of sneaky.
well, I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Alvin was trying to mirror the building and I didn't want to take it to my operations staff without having the operations building close to the lockers. So he put those last two together because I just didn't want to ask my operations staff to look at something like that.
That's no problem. I was pleasantly surprised. Are we going to be able to get copies of that to take a look?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We will send it to the board immediately.
No, I appreciate the effort. And what I really like over here is in terms of the spaces. And so although the one here I like where, you know, the staff parking is 80 spaces. I think the one before it was only like 48. And I think if you're planning something that is for the future, you want your staff parking to also be able to accommodate future growth, not limit it. And with 50 some employees and 48 spaces, I don't know that that's a viable one, but that's just me. Anyway, I really appreciate this and I look forward to getting to take a better look and talk a little more about what we're looking at in terms of costs, et cetera, and ways of paying for this. So thank you.
Ted?
Okay, here we go. The photo you have up here right now, this black dotted line around it, is the corporate yard one complete parcel by itself? Or is this?
It's multiple parcels. So let me go back to our initial. So right now, including the park itself, so there's 3 total parcels that we're looking at in terms of this exploration. So I believe there's a lot line adjustment that we would end up having to move forward with if this site's selected. So
Okay.
so we can develop across those boundary lines, because right now everything's pretty well cordoned off, but in our options right now, we would end up having to bridge a couple of those lots.
All right, thank you. Could you go back to the
Sure. No problem. Start back here.
So the reason why I ask is because this holding pond here that's in the front and half green. So when you fill that in and compact it, that becomes now a buildable space. So why we cutting it off in half when it has to be completely filled in and compacted? You could move some of this over a little bit and turn the building and redo things a little bit better.
That's definitely an option in terms of development. I think for this one, we were in early discussions, we could lose one pond or relocate that one pond. So the pond further south is the one that we're trying to completely maintain intact. And then this one, the one further north would end up having to be relocated or shifted.
I think Mr. Macy is understanding what I'm saying there. The next thing is if we build this building here and we use the road as dirt to come and go, we're going to may be responsible for paving it. So we need to check with the city to see about that cost.
We have done that, and the lot line adjustment that Alvin discussed would define what our responsibilities would be. So what you see on here is that east boundary line would be our responsibility to work through the road issues. You can't see it on this particular photo, but basically where the B is in bioswale is where the school parking lot starts. So the housing facility across the street would improve the road to that point, We would then pick it up at that location and take it to our east boundary.
No, I don't think you understand. You want to come in on the other side of the Horton treatment plant with that dirt road, correct?
With,
You want to come down Park Lane all the way to the east.
okay,
So where's it? That road there goes all the way to the east. What's the next street over?
Verbena.
Verbena. And you want to use Verbena as an egress and ingress.
Correct.
So that's all dirt, correct?
No, there is pavement along
is
Park
pavement?
Lane right now.
Okay,
yes.
it's been a long time since I've
And
been.
then, and like I was mentioning earlier, when that housing development to the north is developed, there is a good chance that they'll have to put a storm sewer down Park Lane and then have to then rehabilitate Park into a more drivable road right now. Right now, the pavement's broken up. The city is looking at taking upon themselves to improve that as it is now, even without us going down there. If it is not improved, we will still have, as we do today, another entrance going down at Horton. We still have the entrance at Horton that directly outlets onto Verbena. You see that you can make out the driveways just south of Corporate Yard. That is a main thoroughfare that we use today to go between the two sites. And if we are coming, for example, when I come to work in the morning, if I'm coming from the south, I take a right down Park Lane, and to go to Horton, I go through the site. So, and that's what our staff does as well. If I'm coming from the north and come down Verbena.
Question, we're only going to be responsible for Park Lane to Verbena, because there's already.
Not to Verbena, only to the east boundary that you see identified here.
Okay, well, you can take that up with, we're going to go before the planning commission with this?
The lot line adjustment would require us to do that. The city is currently going through a cleaning up process between park and public. We have asked the city to go ahead and take the Corporate Yard area as well as the Horton and make sure that that's all combined as public. So the lot line adjustment will also coincide with that. Will be in addition to the zoning change that's going to be happening by the city. And the city's doing that without us. We just had to verify what we wanted to be public and what we wanted to be park. But we will go in front of the planning commission with our lot line adjustment.
Just so the board understands, I'm against this location. And I'm going to go along with whatever the board decides. We're taking, the architect has done a beautiful job designing a building. We're going to put it, a $28 million beautiful building down on the dead end street next to a park where we know there's going to be problems later. We know that we're going to have to put a fence around it. And once you put the fence around it, it just takes away from the architecture of the whole thing. The average response time down there with the police department is probably about 4 minutes. So if somebody gets mad in the neighborhood over their water bill, where's those beautiful glass windows? In the future, from what I understand, and Arden mentioned this, in the future, we may have 200 cars coming into this location. When the city's all built out in the future, we'll probably have 80 employees coming into this location. So that's something that we have to look at, not just today putting a building there. What's going to happen here in the future, 20, 30 years down the road, because this building's going to last 50, 100 years. So what are we really, is this the best location, or should we look for another location? Now, I'm all for building a new center. And as I was speaking with Arturo the other day at Ice Cream Social for Arden, he mentioned to me that there's a lot of staff time is being used with all this driving around back and forth. And I said, well, how much staff time? What's the cost? And we haven't got those exact figures yet. And I spoke with our interim general manager here, Macy, about this. Somewhere around 200,000, 250 a year in staff time being lost, which that goes from there into hiring part-time people to make it up. So it goes beyond that. So we're losing a lot of money by not having the proper facility. So I'm all in favor of it, but I'm not in favor of this location. There's too many things that could go wrong later in the future with it. Thank you.
Okay. Ivan?
I have a couple quick questions. Do you need our preference on layout option to give us the updated idea on cost, or are each of these options gonna be, within a pretty close amount?
The only one that I foresee being different, and it'll be less, was I believe it's option number 4, just because as I was mentioning earlier, we would focus the development on a smaller footprint. So this one could be less. I would say the other ones are all probably about equal in terms of cost, since it's really just moving things around a little bit. It's the same elements. It's the same overall boundary lines. So, but I think to some of the other points of the discussion, just having the site selection, whether the site, the other site, or, if another different site wants to be evaluated, probably of more paramount decision making. And then we can always work through some of these other things based on preference, based on usage, based on flow, based on future development. So.
Okay, and my preference, definitely just glancing at these,
Mhm.
is probably 4 or 5. And I do like Robert's idea of if you could send this to us to really kind of dig into, that would be great. And then a question for staff. What's the thought on if we were to select this site, are we going to, temporarily put the corporate yard at the regional plant, or how much do you see this affecting day to day while it's being built if we were to choose this site?
It's definitely going to impact our operations. There's no question about it. There's no simple way to just displace 25 employees, including our gas and all of our warehouse and all these other things. However, in our discussions to this point, you are correct. The right facility does have men's and women's locker rooms. It does have a kitchenette location. It does have enough parking, because most of those areas that have been disturbed will be then covered with gravel. It will have plenty of space for our trucks and things of that nature, not to mention Horton has the same space down by the sledge drying beds, so we could move people around and do some certain things like that. We do have enough office space for the 4 or 5 people that have offices. For example, our superintendent and C&M, his 2 leads, and then the warehouse person. That's 4 people. We have 4 available offices right now up here that we could move them. We have brought field services here, which has reduced our reliance on the corporate yard, and we are now starting to use it. Our staff is getting a little bit more accustomed to parking next door with our trucks. That way they're walking through and things of that nature. So we're making operational changes just from necessity, but it also has helped us open our eyes to some of the other issues that may happen if we do have to abandon the corporate yard for up to 18 months during construction. So we do have some plans, some thoughts put together. However, we have not sat down with staff, specifically C&M, and said, what are the impacts? How would we do this? One of the things would be, what about gas? What do we do? Do we give everybody a credit card and have them go to Vaughn's because that's closer to being the middle and it's something that would support our larger vehicles? Or do we relocate it? The first thing we do, there are some unique things we could move that down to the Horton and keep it at that location with some of our other trucks. So we haven't completely worked through all of the different options to come up with, but as far as moving 25 people, having locations and splitting them at 2 to 3 different locations, we can accommodate that.
And for us to try and decide on this location, is that a cost estimate that staff could provide in addition to, Renewable Clark's costs? So we have like the whole picture of what we're expecting.
So as part of their contract, there were 2 sites. This constitutes a second site because we never looked at a second site because we made the decision to bunch so quickly. However, we do have all the information that led up to hiring Renew Clark that showed all the different properties we looked at along Palm and other properties that we already currently own. So what I would do is I would turn all that information over to Renew Clark, let them look at it again, refresh it if there are other specific sites the board wanted to look at, and then provide those options. So between Alvin and Eric Weck, we would be able to put those together and look at them again if this site was not selected or there was other options that wanted to be entertained.
And do you see us making these decisions at a workshop, sooner than later, or is this something that's going to push to next meeting? And
this is a very important decision, and it's something that I think the board needs to look at and take as much time as is necessary. I guess one of the good or bad things with the delay in payment is the fact that we do have the opportunity to look at this again, especially with new board members. So At this particular time, we're willing to work at the board's pace, and whatever is necessary to make the right decision, staff is going to support that.
Thank you.
And just for clarification to the public that may be watching this meeting, we already own this property. We don't have to purchase property.
Correct. And I know a lot of questions have been about this particular property and why do we keep coming back to it? And that's probably the primary factor, is that we own the property. It has water, sewer, storm, everything that we would need from a facility perspective is at this location, and we own it. There are other places that we own, but it doesn't have water and sewer, and that would just add to the cost. So the primary reason why this one keeps coming to the top is because the infrastructure is already in place.
And it's centrally located too.
And it is somewhat centrally located for our district, yes.
Okay. Amber?
Just one very, very brief comment or question, I guess it is. The previous discussions at Two Bunch Palm had kind of gotten to the $37 million range as far as the publicly discussed cost.
Not by this organization. It was 28 million.
28. Okay.
Yes.
So there's been a lot of public communication and discussion about this, as we're all aware. But my understanding, if we were to come to this Park Lane corporate yard, we would be looking at more like between 17 and 20. Am I correct in that recollection of our discussions? It was a pretty big difference cost-wise coming here.
I don't want to push this back to Alvin, because when you were talking costs before, I was writing down, I'm like, how did we get to 28 million? I knew that the operations, I believe, was between 3 and 5. The building was, I forget what exactly was. And I think the site itself was somewhere between 8 and 10 or 12. I didn't remember exactly how we got there, but his answer to your question was correct. We were looking at 8 acres there. We're only looking at this. What you see here in option 5 is just over 5 acres. So it is going to be less. But there are some other costs associated with it. He did a great job of dancing around the answer, because the other site was a vacant site. We had to actually get it to an elevation, a common elevation first. This, we would have to be knocking down some structures and doing some other type of construction work. But from that perspective, just on sheer area alone, this is 3 acres less. So you're looking at a 30% reduction. If it is 10 million, it's less, $3 million less. So I don't know if I talked long enough to let Alvin look up the actual cost estimate.
Trying to find it, but yeah.
Perfect.
But yeah.
Love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have it still right in front of me, but yeah, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was 1510 and yeah, that difference between that to get to 28.
3 million, 15, 10, and 3. That's what I sort of remember.
Yeah.
Because I was always so surprised that the operations building was so inexpensive compared to everything else on this site. But I believe it's because it was the construction methods we were using.
Correct.
It's just the, yeah. Go ahead, Alvin.
A prefabricated
Andy, you're not
building.
the only one I treat this way. I just can't keep my mouth closed.
So, but yeah, we did our best to find the most cost-effective solution for the operations building. So, and we did fit something very similar for the East Valley facility. So we felt it was a viable solution for, providing good value to the district.
I just want to try and be as transparent to the public and make sure that we're very clear with the public as far as the money we're talking about here. And if we're no longer, I think it's kind of been apparent that we're no longer talking about Two Bunch Palms, which means we're not talking about a $28 million or a $38 million administrative building. It's going to be less than that if we were to choose this Park Lane facility, no matter what rendition we chose. And I guess I just wanted to make sure the public was clear that we are looking for more cost-saving options in regards to this move as one of the bigger reasons for it in my mind. Anyway, thank you.
I have something, President Martin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Macy and I spoke about the cost earlier of spending an extra $3-4 million or whatever on another piece of property. You can't take a project like this and base where you want to put it based on the cost savings of buying another piece of property. because this is going to be there for years to come, and it has to be the right decision. So the decision has to be made as to, is it the right decision or isn't it? And it's very important, Director Duff, to let the public know that we're trying to watch the cost on this. But like we're talking, there's a saying in the construction business, you pay now or you pay later. And we already learned that with 2 Bunch. So I hope that the board will stay focused on the location. Thank you.
Ivan? Anything further? No?
No, I think that horse is dead.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. That was a good presentation, and I like the work you've done so far.
Very much.
Moving on to item 14, Energy Conservation and Efficiency Service Plan Update from NG Services. Is that going to be Monday?
Yes, that will be Monday. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm curious as to what the procedures are. If we were to, as a board, agree that we want to, let's say, take the recommendations, do we then put out an RFP to get bids to fulfill what they're recommending, and NG then also submits to that? Or have we gone, I guess I'm just trying to understand because we don't have anything to compare to in what they're saying it will cost us. So is that because if we choose their recommendations for energy saving, it then goes out to an RFP for someone to actually build that for us? What's the proper?
So because of the nature of this solar project, this would be considered more of a design bid, or excuse me, a design build and not a design bid build. What that means is we went through a statement of request for qualifications to get a entity that was able to do both the design and aid in the construction of that, whether they did the construction themselves or they went out and then found the right people to do the work. In this particular case, NG was selected through an RFQ process. What they've been working on with staff is coming up with the project, if you will, and then they have come up with costs. There are 2 different parts of this that we are working on, and we have specific things going on behind the scenes. We have one, the financing is a big component of it. The NG went out and put up together a request for proposals for 10, 15 banks. I forget how many. They had the best, and by chance, Bank of America came in. They are going to hold their price until the end of September, and it was right before the Fed increased the cost. So it's another reason why to move that forward. And NG will get into this much more on Monday. We also have bond counsel to protect our interest on a separate contract. So we are going to have a third-party peer review of that process, working right now with Arturo to make sure that we are doing exactly everything we need to not jeopardize any of our previous finance work or even moving forward. The other side of it is the engineering and also the construction. They have talked about going out and getting bids for the construction, much like they did the financing. We are also going to be bringing in somebody to also do a third-party peer review to make sure that the electricity and all the other stuff and the sizing is all appropriate for what we're looking for, and that the cost estimate is correct before we go to Bank of America and say, okay, move forward with the financing, to make sure that that number is right. We don't want to over borrow if we don't have to. So we are looking at both sides of this project moving forward. But then when we do say, if we do decide in September to move forward with the contract with NG and move forward with the financing, then what we will do is we will work with NG to make sure that they follow all the procurement processes to make sure that we are getting the best price and have at least 2 quotes and follow our own procurement like we would if we were managing the project.
Thank you. I needed clarification on how this type of bid process worked, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
And because we are getting grant money, we're talking about almost 6.6 million. That also triggers an audit and things like that when you use that type of money. So they're going to ask all of these questions. So we are going to make sure that we follow all the proper processes, both for Bank of America, for our own bond counsel, as well as the government when they audit the project to get us the $6.5 million. So it will be vetted several different ways.
President Martin, I would like to say a few words so the
Okay,
board
all
can
right, go ahead.
can look into it over the weekend. We have an obligation to make sure that the ratepayers' money is being spent correctly. NG told us in the beginning of this, we're under no obligation to vote on it. So now the next question came in was, we have to do it before September to get to the grant money. As you heard Steve say, the control panels won't be in until the end of October. And when you look back at the handout, you'll see that they compared the energy use for the Nancy Wright treatment plant with the Horton treatment plant. So all that information, why they did that when the contractor already knows how much power they'll be using. So I don't see that there is a big hurry to get this done. And then there's what I would like for the directors to look at is do a little research on this particular grant money. If you take the 7 different parcel numbers and divide that by the 18 million, you'll come out with approximately $250 million. I'm sorry, yeah, $250 million per parcel. So when you apply for the grant, you'd have to be applying for 7 different parcels. You can't just bundle it all into one. So what's the chance of us getting grant money for 7 different parcels? So I don't see the big rush in doing this. We should go out for 2 other companies to give us quotes on how to do this. So that's what I'd like for the directors to think about. Thank you.
Anything further from staff? Any public comments? No? All right. Moving on to the consent agenda, we have 2 items: approval of minutes from July 13th, study session, July 17th board meeting, and July 25th, MSWD DWA joint meeting. The second item on the consent agenda is a register of demands totaling $7,225,939.90. Review these 2 items for a vote on Monday. Does anybody have anything you want to discuss on these 2 items today? Okay. Directors' reports. Does anybody want to do their director's reports today?
We can do one next time too, right?
I'm sorry, what?
They're both separate agenda. So anyways, I made a mistake. That's $2.5 million per site. All I wanted to say, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Does anybody want to do their director's reports today? Okay, we'll do it on Monday then. General manager's report.
We will take that item on Monday as well.
Okay, moving right along. Wow. District council comments.
Yes, just briefly, on Monday, we will have a closed session on the Mission Springs versus DWA case. That is now, the case is fully briefed. You all have copies of all of the briefs that have been filed in that case. They're public record now. And some of the other items that we've been working on for the district include assisting the district on public contracting matters, also assisting with Public Records Act requests. We also worked with the staff, as I mentioned earlier, on updating the employment policies and the employee handbook, and then assisted on an as-needed basis on labor and employment matters. And then last month, I believe it was, we worked on the general manager contract that you approved. So that's my report.
All right.
If I may, President Martin, I just wanted to
Sure.
add that JP's firm has looked at the NG contract already, and they have already gone back and forth at least once over that. So we are trying to get everything lined up if we do decide to move forward in September, but I appreciate his firm turning that around as quickly as they did.
Okay. Does anybody have any thing else they want to bring up before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.